Welcome to the Wildlife Wire. I'm Mark Searles,
And I'm Samantha Miller.
and this is your source for wildlife news and the people that make it. On today's episode, Wyoming's still doing bad things, a spotlight on Savannah, possible wolf pups in Colorado, and Wally the Beaver.
Hello. How are you today, Mark? Good to see you.
Hi, Sam. I'm doing well. Getting ready for my daughter's big birthday bash tomorrow, but things are good.
Woohoo! What are you
How?
doing at the birthday bash?
Oh, well, we're changing. We're trying to be advocates, not only for wildlife, but to bring back the at-home party. So parents don't
Oh.
have to spend hundreds of dollars to take their kids to buy all the kids, trampoline park things and this and that. And it's like, no, we're
Okay.
staying at home.
Okay. So wow, that's thrilling. You did do something that was more thrilling though. You were at the Capitol yesterday testifying on a bill. Can you talk a bit about that?
Yeah, so that was House Bill 1258. This bill was to update the language on CPW, Colorado Parks and Wildlife statute, to align it to be more science-based. I did have the honor of being on the last panel and provide some rebuttals to some folks that maybe their story doesn't always get out there and shed a complete picture on where they're coming from and the bad things that they're involved in. So it was nice to be able to provide rebuttals. And unfortunately, it lost. Uh, the main concern that I was hearing throughout the committee members was that it called for science-based management, but they weren't sure. They felt it was too vague, and they didn't know where that science-based management was coming from. Was it coming from CPW, or was it coming? Did it have to be a outside source, or what? So, I think there is possibility to run a stronger version of this bill again in the future and have clear expectations of what it wants to accomplish, but it was great to see a bunch of advocates out and fighting for our wild neighbors.
Well, I also got to see you this week because we were also at Colorado Parks and Wildlife testifying. So we had a
Yeah.
whole testify party this week. And I think one of the big things we talked about there was fur auctions and how Colorado Parks and Wildlife is a sponsor, at least of an organization that puts on a fur auction every year that exploits our wildlife and commercializes wildlife furs. And we know that that's a huge problem and it contributes to mass extinctions. That this is why we've lost a lot of species in North America historically. So I'm glad we were able to talk about that. And my first news story this week touches on that too, not on Colorado's issues with its fur policies, but with our favorite state. Can you guess which state it is?
Hawaii.
I wish I was in Hawaii right now. No, no, I said
Wyoming.
that. Yes, I said it with sarcasm. It was going to be Wyoming or Idaho or Utah. So you picked correctly out of the three. Um, so a couple weeks ago, I reported on a news story that talked about the potential for river otters to be trapped in Wyoming in response to damage. And that Wyoming legislators, as many legislatures are around the country right now, introduced a bill that would remove otters' protected status so they could be trapped and killed for conflict. Now, we guessed, are the otters eating koi? And then we're like, maybe there's not that many koi ponds in Wyoming. Apparently, they're bothering some things along waterways, and there are a lot of ways you can do non lethal mitigation around that. However, um, Wyoming decided, no, we still want to be able to kill them anyway. And they did, in fact, pass into law legislation HB 45 to allow for trapping of problem otters. They say this is not a commercial season and this is not a trapping season. It would just be to issue a permit for conflict. I feel like this is a slippery slope in a lot of states. If you start opening the door and lowering protections, we know it goes further and further and further. So otters have lost that protected status, and I am sad to report that. And I'm hoping that Wyoming legislators will get out of here with that attitude. There you go. I got my pun in too.
I saw your head shaking there. Yeah. Yeah. Wyoming, the place that you would think the only way they could go is up, but yet they still keep going down.
That that they do. That they do. I would say I was surprised, but I'm not. I think it's really tragic. I mean, Wyoming is home to some of the most charismatic species in this country. They have beautiful landscapes. They've got national parks. It's just a stunning space up there. So yeah, it's a tragedy all around, and I hope that one day Wyoming will start recognizing the value of its wildlife. So I'm
Yeah.
sorry to bring us down. Sorry to bring us
Well,
down.
speaking of value, though, where do otters keep all their prized possessions? A
Okay.
riverbank.
Did you Google that while I was talking? You did. Did you ask ChatGPT for an otter joke?
I found a whole list of otter jokes. Some of them, that was the best one I found. So
It's because I riffed one off the cuff and now you're looking them up.
yeah, hey, I have a simple mind. I need help, okay? Shall we
Well,
go to another body of water?
let's go to another body of water.
So this was a story out of Savannah, Georgia, and it's not necessarily news as much as it is advocating for this wonderful place. It's one of my favorite places in Georgia. So it's called the Savannah National Wildlife Refuge. And actually, technically, it's not in Georgia. It's on the other side of the Savannah River in South Carolina. But if you're ever in the Savannah area, take the few-minute drive out of town, and you get to this wonderful refuge that has alligators and many birds and snakes and all the really cool stuff. And a little fun fact about the history of my wildlife photography: when I was 8 years old, I won my first photo competition
Wow.
with a photo of an alligator from the Savannah National Wildlife Refuge.
Wow, that's exciting. Alligators are terrifying to me. But yes, how did you capture that photo?
With a camera.
I know with a camera, but were you like on a hoverboat? I don't know. How are you
No,
seeing the
no.
alligator? How
So
far away were you?
yeah. So one thing that it was I learned in this article was, so they have about 4 miles that you can drive through the refuge, and they're kind of built up roads in the marshlands. But what I didn't know is, beyond that 4.5 mile wildlife drive, there's nearly 40 miles of protected trails that run through the wetlands that you
Oh,
can
wow.
only access by bike or by walking. So I'm sure seeing an alligator up close on a bicycle, well, when the alligator's not on a bicycle, you're on a bicycle.
Okay.
Either way, it'd be really wild. But what a great way to experience that kind of landscape, being out there on foot or on bike. So I know certainly next time I go out there, I will try to rent a bike and hit those trails. It sounds like an amazing experience. But the winter months are really the best, pretty much for any kind of wetland area in the southeast. Well, in the southern part of our country, but in the southeast, you get some really great bird species. I know on my list, doing a kayaking trip in the Everglades in the winter is always up there. So highly recommend it for anyone who is interested in alligators, interested in bird life. Uh, check out Savannah, Georgia. Check out the Wildlife Refuge. Savannah is a beautiful place. The story goes uh, that when General Sherman was marching down through the South and he burned every city along the way, that he got to Savannah and it was just too gorgeous to set fire to. So that's why it remains the way it does.
Wow.
Yeah.
Wow. Well, thank you for that story, Mark. And I hope some folks can get out and see the alligators, and kayaking in the Everglades is also on my list. I think it's such a biodiverse area and it's so cool. Alligators do scare me, but I also think they're very cool. And I would love to see them in the wild. Well, are you ready for other things I'd love to see in the wild?
Yes. Hey, and let me tell you this:
Okay.
alligators, not really that. They are very intimidating, but they're not actually that scary. Crocodiles in a canoe or kayak, more scary. The most scary is kayaking with hippos and knowing that if you get knocked out of your kayak, that the crocodiles are there as well. Most scary.
That is terrifying. So thank you for putting that into perspective for me. And I will stop being a coward and move on.
Good.
Okay. So here's my other story for you today. And that's that we might be expecting wolf pups soon.
Yeah.
And it appears that, according to Colorado Parks and Wildlife, that some of the wolves are traveling in pairs together now. We have 30 wolves in the state, and we're seeing them mostly concentrated in counties where we want to see them, where there's great wolf habitat. And I am so hopeful that we have wolf pups and we can tell this conservation success story of wolf reintroduction and celebrate those successes this time around. I think that the loss of the Copper Creek pack, and I know that they've been re-released. Those were the wolves that CPW trapped for conflict, kept in captivity, and then re-released them. But I still consider it a loss because the father of that wolf family died, and one pup was left behind. But I am hopeful that this new set of wolf families will thrive and we can share that story, and that the state will continue to implement non lethals and really look at preemptive non lethals during this breeding season. Usually, when pups are born, that tends to be a more high conflict time because you've got family needs and you also have calving or lambing happening right around that time, too. So I really am hopeful that the state's doing some preemptive work right now and doing outreach right now. But I am encouraged that we have pairs moving together. So some good news and a ray of hope from me.
Yeah, yeah, really exciting. And so to take the wolves from 29 to 30 here in Colorado, that 30th wolf is a wolf that naturally migrated here,
Yes.
that is out on the West Slope and I guess has been here for a while. And they just hadn't confirmed. They'd had lots of reportings of that wolf, but nothing that they could actually report saying, yes, this is for certain a wolf. This is certainly not one of the wolves that we have reintroduced. And that wolf has been living here without causing conflict. So the other day, after you had left the meeting to head back up the mountain, uh, one of the CPW commissioners, Marie Haskett, who we both will tend to have disagreements with, she said this story needs to be out there. Basically, that this wolf has been living with uh, farmers and ranchers out on the West Slope and not causing any issues for a while now. And I was like, yes, Marie, yes, share that wolf story. Let
Yes,
them know.
preach.
Yeah, let them know that the majority, we only hear the bad news, right? And let's share some good news.
Yeah, I agree. Let's share some good news about wolves, especially when we have it. And I'm glad that Marie highlighted that. We need to get that information out. And I know that conflict gets clicks, right? We live in a news cycle now where whatever gets the most clicks is what news outlets will publish over and over again, and conflict gets it. So I hope that we can share more success stories. That would be great.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, that was in my wolf comment to the commission on Wednesday. That was part of it was please control the narrative, share the positive stories, put payouts from wolf for wolf claims, put those in context of other species like elk that are causing 40, like they just had a claim for $41,000 for elk eating alfalfa. Make sure that that gets out to the press. Make sure that
Yeah.
when we're talking about the number of cows or sheep that are killed by wolves, let's put it in the context of how many cows and sheep are killed by weather and birthing complications and disease, and why ranchers have carcass pits. They don't they don't just have them as a just in case. They have them because cows are dying.
Yeah.
And
Yeah, I
let's
think
figure it out.
I mean, we can do this all the time. There's so many things that you can contrast in state wildlife management across states where one species is treated completely different than the other, and one group of people is treated completely differently than another. And it goes back to our state agencies being historically not built for wildlife and not being built for people with a different value set than traditional values of hunting and trapping. So we have to work through these institutions to get change, and it's hard. I wish that if there were a dangerous moose in the area, I'd get an alert, but I certainly get one if there's a mountain lion going around. And moose are far more dangerous than mountain lions are, and we don't get alerts like that in Grand County. So I hope that we continue to shed light on these disparities between how we manage animals.
Yeah, absolutely. Oh, and if you see moose and squirrel together, big trouble, big trouble. Just walk away. So
I
do you want to
will.
hear about positive change?
I do want to
You want
hear
to
about positive
hear do you
change.
want to hear about people coming together
Yes, absolutely. Tell me the
to
story.
stop the
Oh
man?
God. Okay, yes. They're stopping the man. I'm
They're
ready.
stopping the man. And
Okay.
who are we talking? Who is benefiting from this positive change? Why, it's no other than Wally the beaver.
Wally the beaver.
Now you may ask, who is Wally the beaver? And let me enlighten you. So Wally the beaver lives at Kingstown Lake in Fairfax County, Virginia.
Okay.
There was concern that Wally was going to eat too many small trees around this lake that's also a stormwater management facility,
Okay.
and that it would create erosion and sediment moving downstream and all these things. But the Friends of Kingstown Lake came up with a petition, and
Ooh.
this petition got 2,000 signatures to save Wally the beaver. And you know what? It worked.
They saved Wally?
Wally is there. He's not going anywhere. The Save Wally petition was on change.org and it worked. So,
Yay! Wally lives on. He's a symbol of the resistance now.
looking back at Prop 127 and any big wildlife policy that's trying to be advanced forward, uh, I was desperately hoping for a Wally the Beaver in lion form, right? Like to have an effort like this for one animal uh, really goes to show how when we remove that population wide kind of mountain lions or wolves or blah, blah, and we can focus in on one animal, it pulls at people's hearts.
Yeah. Yeah. And
So yeah, go ahead.
oh, no, I just was going to say I completely agree. And I think that that's why so many folks have a hard time relating to wildlife management as it stands now because it's so populations focused. And even state agency employees don't really get to tell the story of these individual animals like Wally. Or like in California, P22, we had a lion there that was the Brad Pitt of lions. And I thought that, back to our conversation with Larry Taylor, he did a great job of talking about how do we really tell the individual story while also talking about populations and integrate that into management, because the Wally is who brings the people in. And then how do we get them to care? And I'm really encouraged by that story, Mark. Thanks for sharing that.
Yeah. Yeah. When I found it this morning, I said, this is the one we got to end here. This is the kind of news that we need. People doing a good thing, even if it's only one animal, because that one animal has value in himself. And so
Oh,
good on Wally getting the respect that he deserves.
long live Wally.
All right. Well, that wraps up our news for today, and on to our interview. All right. Well, we have a very special guest today, Mr. Scott Wilson. Scott is a personal hero of mine and friend and role model. He has led the way in turning photography into advocacy. And while we differ on our species that we focus on, that passion exists in both of us. So Scott is the 2022 Sony Photographer of the Year for his photograph called Anger Management, which, if you haven't seen that photograph, it is amazing and powerful, along with the many other images of wild horses that he has taken. So, Scott, welcome. If you could talk to us a little bit about your journey from landscape photography into wild horse photography, and then moving that into also photo advocacy.
Yeah, sure. Thank you, Mark, and hello, Samantha. It's nice to meet you both. Or obviously I already know you, Mark, but funnily enough, I just did a presentation last week to a group of senior high school photography students, and answered exactly that question, Mark. So I think I can just probably bring back some of the messages there, and I kind of capture it as a personal journey towards photo advocacy. And I think that the point around personal is that this is kind of my story. There's no rules, and you have your own form of photo advocacy. So, we can all develop our own path. The fact that it's a journey means there's been a lot of change, and I'll get into some of that change as I describe the journey. And it's kind of set me off on different paths. And I think towards is the point that this never ends. It's like, I think you will always be on a journey towards photo advocacy and never really feel that you've completed the journey or completely solved all of your advocacy issues or challenges. And then photo advocacy itself is just my expression of what I would call cause-related photography, and actually ploughing our creative skills into a cause that we really believe in. And that's been something that's become my kind of guiding mission in later years. But as you kind of understand my journey, it didn't always start that way. I mean, I had a very normal, if you like, business career, and photography was something that I had alongside that. And in many ways, it was a hobby and an outlet. But the more I kind of grew into photography and appreciated the community role that it can actually play, I would start with simple things like taking photographs of the school rugby team or the school track team and then presenting them those images at the end of the year. And you see the faces light up. They feel like professional athletes. And so that lifts the whole kind of community. And you see the value that an image can actually bring to a community like that. I was very seriously into landscape photography at the time. I was lucky enough to get into the Landscape Photographer of the Year final 4 times in the UK. So I was kind of programmed that landscape photography was my journey. And then I had an invitation to move to Colorado with my day job. And as a landscape photographer, it's like you don't even hesitate. The idea that you can move to Colorado and just some of the most amazing landscape in the world. And remember, that's coming from a Scotsman who was an absolute fabulous landscape environment. So we moved here and basically traveled every single corner of Colorado over the space of a year. In the first year, I was lucky enough to be invited to join John Fielder's gallery as a resident artist. So now sadly departed. But you know, to have that kind of welcome into a brand new landscape photographer's environment was fabulous, and everything was going great. So I'm a year into the new job, year into the kind of photography scene in Denver. I was named Instagrammer of the Year by Westward Magazine in 2017. But a year after being here, I got the tragic news that I was stage 4 colon cancer diagnosed. And as you can imagine, at that point, your life just stops in many ways. And my one of my first thoughts was, you know, if I've got a treatment plan, I'm going to need my photography to kind of get through it from a therapy point of view. And that's when my oncologist said, well, Scott, we do have a plan, but it involves a drug called panitumumab, which is incredibly photosensitive. And literally, you will not be able to expose your skin to sun at all. And that really set me back. So how do I basically get through this from a therapeutic point of view? And that's when I appreciated we have this abundance of wildlife on our doorsteps in Colorado. It's absolutely stunning. The state park network is just fabulous, and most of them you can kind of drive through. And so I started photographing wildlife from the protective shade of my car so I could indulge my passion, go through my treatment, and actually stay safe from the sun. So that set off a whole new track around wildlife photography and a whole new advocacy path around colorectal cancer. I joined the board of the Colorectal Cancer Alliance. I started to campaign very heavily to see a reduction in the age of screening from 50 to 45. To make that real, I was diagnosed at 48. And that's that kind of the opposite of a sweet spot, is that kind of old enough to get the disease, but not old enough to qualify for automatic screening. So having that law changed, I think, has genuinely saved lives. And now the standard approaches 45 years old. And it was around about this time doing wildlife photography that I was introduced to actually a sanctuary in eastern Colorado where they had rescued wild horses, a bit like you're saying, Samantha, you know, sort of rescued Mustangs. And I loved it. I loved the environment, but there was something itching me. I said, where are they still wild? Where are they running wild? And that's said, you've got to drive 5 hours basically northwest, past Craig, keep going towards the Wyoming border, and you will find Samwash Basin. And it's 160,000 acres of just, you know, sage landscape. It's absolutely stunning. The kind of just undulations and the wild territory, and then maybe after an hour or so, you just hear this, and you realize that there's wild horses over the hill about to have a fight. It was springtime, and the foals have been born, and the mares are ready to breed again, and the stallions are fighting for the right to be their chosen one, if you like. And so, as a photographer, it was an absolutely inspiring new experience, and I say opened up this whole new world of, at that time, just photographic interest. I mean, I think we'll get in shortly to the kind of advocacy side that emerged from there, but I've talked a lot, so I'll let you ask any questions that come from me.
Yeah, no, I so appreciate your journey. And I think that, you know, finding a way to incorporate photography in your healing journey too is really inspiring to folks. And horses are incredibly healing as well. I've healed a lot through my work with horses. And I'm curious, you know, will you stay in Colorado now too? And are wild horses going to continue to be the focus of your work?
So wild horses are definitely the focus of my work. And long-term retirement plans, my wife is from northern Spain, and she gave up life in northern Spain to move to Scotland, and then we had 20 years in England, and we've had 10 years in Colorado. I feel the hankering to
She sounds very forgiving and flexible for moving around.
love Colorado. I mean, our children have largely been brought up here. They moved here at 10 and 14, so we're very settled here. So all I'm leaving open are the possibilities.
I like that. I like that a lot. We can dig into wild horses a bit in a second. Mark, did you have follow-up questions about Scott's beginning of his journey?
No, I love taking that scary negative news and how it turned into such a positive for you in the long term. And yeah, I know that when these things happen, I had a stent put in when I was 34 years old. I was racing bicycles. I was in the peak shape of my life, and these things just come, and you don't know how you're going to react, and you hopefully it can be an impetus for loving life, for being out there, for finding more passion. And so I'm so thankful that that wild horses helped you in your recovery and find a new pathway for you. And so let's tell us about the Sandwash Basin. So I haven't been there personally. I've heard about it from you. I've heard about it from others. And what makes that place special? And how did it come about as being a sanctuary basically for wild horses?
Yeah, so I'm going to do a PSA first because you brought up kind of the sort of screening things, and this is actually Colorectal Cancer Awareness Month. So my message to anybody who's eligible for screening that hasn't done it is you are dithering and avoiding a life-saving experience. So yeah, so just to land that message, there's so many people that actually ignore free colonoscopy. And it's a slightly uncomfortable way to avoid an incredibly uncomfortable period in life. So I just want people to kind of hold that thought. But as far as Sandwash Basin goes, and we'll come back later to how this has come full circle. And you talked about therapy, Samantha. I'm about to launch a therapy program for cancer patients related to horses. So I do
Wonderful. Yeah.
The Sandwash Basin, I mean, it's just this. I mean, I use the line, their freedom is our freedom. And when I kind of drive through the entranceway to Sandwash Basin, I just feel this kind of life washing away, and you just in this kind of vast wilderness. It's 157,000 acres. It's probably about the size of, think of Greater Chicago, to give you a kind of sense of perspective. And across that vast range, there's maybe 300 horses. So it's not like you drive in there and just see this massive group of horses galloping towards you. You have to spend time finding them, understand where the water holes are, where they're going to go in winter when the water holes are frozen, etc. So there's a lot of tracking and patience. It's a unforgiving drive, so you have to be very aware that this is 4x4 country. I mean, there's a kind of arterial dirt road network through there that you could probably get through it with a normal vehicle in the height of summer when the roads are baked hard. But if you go in a month in mud season, there's just mud spraying everywhere. So you have to. I always have to warn people: you don't just show up and drive around. You have to be well prepared. And being stranded there, for example, in the middle of winter with a flat tire, which is a kind of normal occurrence, would be a very kind of unpleasant experience. But when you see the wild horses, those concerns just kind of wash away. And it's an absolute majestic sight to see them. And I would also point out that they are part of a whole wildlife ecology in that basin. And I've seen golden eagles, I've seen elk, badgers, pygmy owls, mule deer. I mean, the range of wildlife that there's absolutely fascinating. So, I mean, my primary focus from an art point of view is bringing home wild horse photography. But I love the array of wildlife there, and always try and focus on capturing as much of that as possible. And when I've captured the wild horses, the landscape gene sort of kicks back in, and there's just some stunning landscape there as well to capture. So I feel like it's just this treasured area of Colorado. Because it's so remote, you don't see loads and loads of people, and that's not something I'm saying, hey, people stay out. I would love it if people saw this as a jewel in Colorado, and more people enjoyed what they see. But there is something very liberating about having so much land to yourself for a few days.
And so you mentioned that there are 300 horses there. How does that number fluctuate? Is that number artificially maintained? And what role does the government have in maintaining wild horses?
Yeah, so the animals are euphemistically federally protected, but I mean, arguably that's federally controlled, and there are constant battles, if you like, for wild horses to preserve their freedom, their right to kind of roam that land. If you want to look at the big picture, there's 27 million acres of public land in the United States where wild horses can roam, but that number was 54 million in 1971. And the exact same ratio applies in Colorado. There was 800,000 acres of public land in 1971, and now there's that's been reduced to 400,000. So wild horses can be found in 4 main herd management areas. Herd management area, again, is a federal piece of land. Sam Wash Basin is one of those. Piceance East Douglas is another area near Rifle. You have Little Boot Cliffs near Grand Junction, and then Spring Creek Basin, which is down southwest near Telluride. The largest by far are Piceance East Douglas and Sam Wash Basin in terms of land mass. And we're not, as I say, we're not talking about a huge population of horses, but when the government deems that they have exceeded the carrying capacity of that land, they will literally send in the helicopters to round them up and remove them. And we're now in a situation where there's 66,000 horses in holding off range. And that's now more than the number of wild horses that we have on range. So we've got this completely crazy situation where we have more captive wild horses than there are running wild. And that has become an additional advocacy channel for me. I now dedicate a lot of my prior business experience to supporting American wild horse conservation. So it's not all camera work. You know, I've got a background in marketing and communications. So I work closely with them on just strategic opportunities to raise awareness of some of the challenges that wild horses face, and then just seek solutions. I mean, this is a solutions-oriented organization. And Colorado, believe it or not, is actually leading the way when it comes to trying to bring stakeholders together around the table to say, right, okay, we do have these challenges. We want to preserve the freedom of wild horses, but there are other stakeholder interests to consider. How do we manage those? And I think it's been a really good kind of model for political collaboration that was triggered by a bill called SB 23275 2 years ago, which created the Colorado Wild Horse Working Group. The leader of that bill, it was bipartisan, so both sides kind of got together. The figurehead now is Monica Duran. So she's kind of driven that through, and now it's an active group. So the Colorado Department of Agriculture operates the working group. They collaborate with the federal team, which still own the land. They still make the rules. But what they have allowed is the state of Colorado to introduce $1.5 million worth of investment, which is funding in the wild conservation measures like fertility control, which hopefully ultimately reduces the need for helicopters and allows these horses just to live, have lifelong freedom basically without threat of removal.
Yeah. Sorry, Scott. I just had a quick question more from an animal welfare standpoint. These holding pens, I've heard terrible rumors about how conditions are there and how opaque that kind of management is in the holding pens. Can you talk to our listeners a bit about what that structure is like?
Certainly, the fuller and more cramped they get, the higher the risk is of disease. And we had a awful situation in Colorado just a couple of years ago when 145 horses, which were removed from West Douglas, which is adjacent to that East Douglas area I was talking about earlier, they died from an outbreak of equine influenza, which is not a disease horses get in the wild. So the fact, they're put in these cramped domestic conditions, we do open them up to that kind of risk that simply wouldn't exist in the wild. So our argument again is, they are safer in the wild, leave them there, manage the situation in the wild, prevent the numbers from growing through humane fertility control, rather than waiting for the numbers to grow to a point that you're bringing in helicopters and brutally removing them. And obviously, there's all sorts of risks through the roundups themselves. Foals get distressed, separated from their parents, horses break their legs, have to be euthanized, etc. And that's even before you get into the holding situation, the associated risks there. So there are. If you only look through the ethical lens, there's every argument to manage this situation in the wild. If you want to introduce an economic lens, then it's something like $1 billion over 5 years to manage this whole program. The cost of rounding up a horse by helicopter and keeping it captive for life is $48,000 a horse. It costs about $1,500 to administer fertility control to a horse in the wild. So whether you look through an ethical lens or an economic lens, that there's an argument for keeping things in the wild.
Yeah, it feels like we should let DOJ know about that problem there. And maybe they could make some changes. My other question is, when they're regulating the wild horse number, I believe they take into consideration also cattle grazing on public lands too, and that's how they divvy up the carrying capacity, if you will. They'll add in cattle and elk and deer, and then allot wild horses a specific number based on that. How does cattle interplay with wild horses that you're advocating for in Colorado?
Again, the BLM has kind of 4 primary functions as far as public lands go. One is wildlife, one is recreation, one is oil and gas, and one is livestock. So they would say that they're kind of almost managing those 4 areas equally. We would argue that the lands that have been designated as appropriate for wild horses should have a wild horse priority. And there is definite competition for grazing from livestock. Predominantly in Sam Wash Basin, it would be sheep rather than cattle. But if you watch 5,000 sheep pour into Sam Wash Basin around a pond, they literally suck that thing dry. So there's absolutely no doubt in my mind that the livestock grazing has an impact on wild horse viability. And what happens is the propaganda kicks in for around what's actually the wild horses are damaging the ground. They have to be removed in order to allow the livestock to come back in. But livestock are a far greater, more proven damage to public lands grazing than wild horses. And if you want to look at the kind of the economics of it, the subsidization of livestock grazing on public lands is extraordinary. I mean, the grazing rate hasn't changed since the 1980s. So we're kind of talking about 50 years without any inflation.
Yeah. Yeah, it's crazy to see. I saw this on my own property, and I have a great picture of a fence line where I grazed my own horses on my property, and then on the property next door they grazed cattle, and horses are just constantly moving, which is a different behavior than cattle or sheep have. They're always moving, they're always on alert, whereas cows and sheep tend to hang out in those riparian areas and those wetlands, suck up all the water, and then you see a total difference in how the grass looks just from one side of the fence to the other, and how the sagebrush is doing just from one side of the fence to the other, and the ecosystems, really, the water storage and everything. So I think horses do make a compelling case for that. Speaking of ecosystems, how do they interface with other wild animals in our ecosystems?
Well, I mean, if you go back, then all the world's horses were actually born in North America. So, I mean, North America is the origin of the species. So there is an argument that they were made extinct by the Ice Age, and a bit at worst, then they're a reintroduced native species. So the point is they already have a place in the ecology of this nation, and the livestock don't. So if there's a kind of automatic interference with the sort of native ecology, it's not coming from the wild horses, albeit that's one of the big kind of arguments against them. So one of the things that we are trying to promote is this notion that wild horses actually belong. They have their native origin here, and they merit the same kind of balanced assessment that other wildlife have in these areas. So I think that's one of the things we're so encouraged by Colorado's approach, and actually, the fact that the working group's now part of the Colorado Division of Agriculture, and having a kind of wildlife perspective on how they should be maintained.
One cool thing I heard, and then I'll let Mark ask questions because I'm sure Mark has questions, and I feel like I am dominating the question period right now. So I apologize, Mark. My question is, I heard that wild horses do some really great things around wildfire. Can you speak to that at all?
So there is an argument that wild horses will basically consume the tinder, if you like, cheatgrasses, etc., and provide a fire break. So certainly that's one of the suite of arguments in defence of wild horses, is their ability to help reduce or contain wildfires. Whether that's a massive scale benefit at this stage, I think there are other arguments for their preservation, but that's definitely in the toolbox, if you like, of things that why we should keep wild horses safe.
And when you were speaking of the helicopter roundups, I couldn't help the whole time you were talking about that. I saw one of my favorite images of yours in my head, of the low flying helicopter coming in. I mean, it's just one of the most powerful images, with the helicopter with the horses in the foreground. Where was that taken?
So there's 2 or 3 images I can think of related to that, because I've travelled quite a lot now. But probably West Douglas. If it's got there's loads of dust around it.
Yeah.
Just outside Meeker and Rifle.
Okay.
And that does bring me back to this journey we were talking about, Mark. And I was asked a question recently when I did this same school presentation last year. Someone said, how did winning the World Photography Awards kind of change your life? And it was such a thought-provoking question from a young person. And I think what it did is release me. That I didn't have to keep proving the art side, and actually could focus a lot more deeply on the advocacy side. And so that took me down a photojournalistic path that I hadn't really forced myself down so much before. And I joined an agency actually introduced by Marlon Rees, the first gentleman, called We Animals, which is the world's leading animal photojournalism agency. And they're almost at the kind of forefront of just changing minds and making change around animal welfare. So I now find a lot of my effort and energy being challenged to that. So exposing the wrongs that are happening, the plight of wild horses, rather than just profiling the beauty.
And so back to the lands and how BLM divvies up, their 4 main areas that they're always looking at, whether it's grazing or wild horses or oil and gas. What is the contention? Is it contentious these days for the 4 wild horse areas in Colorado? Is there still constant pressure from others that are wanting to get on that land? And if so, what do you think the BLM is? Are they pretty steadfast in keeping that for wild horses?
They're steadfast in keeping it for the 4 areas of interest. So not predominantly for wild horses. The exception is Little Bookcliffs, which is a designated wild horse area, as opposed to managed for the 4 areas. So you don't see livestock in Little Bookcliffs, for example. But in terms of that constant threat, yes, it exists. So the BLM has come to the table around the Colorado Wild Horse Working Group. There's a willingness there to explore a greater degree of fertility control, which would keep numbers lower humanely and prevent the need for helicopters over the long term. But that doesn't mean the helicopters are not still coming in the interim. So even just last year, there was a major or a significant roundup at Little Bookcliffs once the Colorado Working Group had already kind of been up and running. So definitely these things are in parallel. There's a scoping period right now about opening up parcels of San Morse Basin for oil and gas drilling. So that's a public comment period. It's open, I think, for the next 10 days until March the 17th. So So yes, there are constant issues. I don't think the horses can ever settle from that point of view. One of the there's kind of two avenues here for improvement. One would be to get back to larger numbers. So our argument would be the carrying capacity that's set for these areas has been kind of arbitrarily reached. So reassessing the appropriate management levels, as they're called, and allowing more horses on that land is one route. The other route is to allow more land. And if you think back to the point I made that there was 800,000 acres of wild horse land in 1971, and now there's 400,000. Well, there's an opportunity there. Is there even opportunities with the state federal collaboration to start to blend some of the land areas, even within Piansop? East Douglas, there's significant areas of state land that are separated off for wild horses because they're a federal property, if you like. So the working group has opened up possibilities around state-federal partnership that I'm very optimistic about, and I think we're still really to uncover some of the greater solutions that might exist around land availability.
And forgive me, sometimes my questions come one segment behind because I like to chew on them for a little bit. But I loved how you were talking about interacting with the high school students. What kind of, I love getting into classrooms as well. I have a soon to be 7-year-old daughter, and I will be talking in her class next week about coyotes. So I always, I know you agree that the youth is so powerful in shaping our future and providing them the inspiration to know that they can go out there and make a difference. Do you ever have students that come up to you and talk to you about whether it's wild horses or if it's other animals that they're passionate about and that they want to pursue?
I do. And one of the things I'm always very clear on, Mark and Samantha, is I'm not trying to convert a room full of students to be wild horse advocates. I am opening them up to the possibility of using their work to support their communities and the things that they're interested in. If that happens to be wild horses, that's fine. But I'm not trying to convert them. And one of the most rewarding moments of every year, I've done this talk for the last 8 years, and a week after every talk, I get this huge envelope of cards from the students. And it's expressing that, and I'm sure they're told to write them. I'm not denying that. But the point is, the response is so inspiring for me. I actually end up wondering who's inspiring who. And they absolutely fill me with kind of awe and imagination and curiosity for my next year. So that it's such a refreshing, re-energizing thing for me to do. If I just give them a fraction of what they're giving me, it's fabulous.
Yeah, we talk about this a lot in the advocacy space where how do we bring kids on board, right? Whether it's wildlife advocacy, wild horse advocacy, or plugging in on climate change and really demystifying how they can engage. And it's so cool that you are doing that. How would you say that folks like Mark or I, or people that are interested in talking to schools, how did you start getting into classrooms?
So they approached me. So I think I had a little bit of a name around and things I was doing. So the course teacher reached out to me and asked if I would come along and talk about my journey. And at that time, it was the cancer related journey. So it was much more about the book that was related to that. But what's allowed me to, if I look back my presentations over the last 8 years, I can actually see how my life has evolved, how my advocacy has evolved. And even the teacher said, every year it's been almost a completely different story. It always starts the same, but the chapters that keep getting added on are different. So they kind of reached out to me, and then word starts to spread. So you might get a camera club asking you to go along and talk. The Denver University Department of Psychological Oncology asked me to go along and talk to them about mindset and how that had kind of how wildlife photography helped me get through cancer. So there's just so many spikes to this, whether it's wildlife, wild horses, photography, advocacy, cancer. And I love the fact that, you know, I've managed to create this hybrid of all of those things in one presentation.
And I'm curious too. So we're getting close to the end of our conversation, but I know you mentioned launching a therapeutic practice with horses, and I'd love to learn a bit about that before we talk about Wild Horse Awareness Month and what folks can do.
So, gosh, when I was diagnosed, I was 48 and my children were 10 and 14. and I can't imagine, I know what was going through my mind, but I can't imagine what was going through their mind. And there aren't really resources around for people affected by cancer and to actually talk about it. Mental health is completely understandably secondary to trying to fix the physical health. But I think we're now at a stage in society that we can allow ourselves to focus much more deeply on some of the mental health pressures. So that's kind of one piece of stimulus. And I've been introduced a lot to wild horse rescues and sanctuaries. I have seen the amazing benefit to veterans suffering post-traumatic stress disorder that horses can provide. And it's not always just the interaction with the horse. The horse might be the gateway to the conversation that's necessary. And I've been wondering, how does one apply that in the kind of cancer circumstance? There's so many parallels between veteran PTSD and cancer-related PTSD. And then there was a specific article about 3 months ago. And it was from a group called Stand Up to Cancer. And they said, the big problem now is that we're actually fixing more people of cancer. So life after cancer for a whole generation is a challenge that we didn't have in our parents' generations, because frankly, those people weren't around. So we've got more and more people surviving cancer, but they bring that trauma with them and they don't really have an outlet for that. And that was when the light went on for me, that I have to do this. I have to bring my cancer experience, my advocacy, and my experience of rescues together. And I approached a very prominent rescue in Littleton, Colorado called Zumas. They have already got 2 mental health therapists on their books who help work with veterans. So for them, it's not a difficult kind of re-expression to make this appropriate to cancer patients. And they threw themselves in, and we're basically launching a pilot program in the spring, which will be equine assisted therapy for cancer survivors, patients, and families. And the key thing there for me is it's not just the people who've suffered the disease, it's people who've suffered indirectly the disease as well.
Yeah, Scott, that is just amazing. And we are all thankful for that kind of work that you are doing. And one thing I was thinking about as you were saying that is, you know, it's so important that we all have our strengths. We all have our areas of expertise and of passion, and figuring out how to utilize those to bring change in a positive way is something I think a lot of us struggle with, and that sometimes we spend years and years before we figure it out. I know for me, it was a long time before all the pieces kind of clicked and I realized what I can offer to wildlife advocacy. But so it is inspiring just to know, like, everyone has things out there that they're really good at and that can bring positive change. So thank you for that message. And we would like to turn to Wild Horse Advocacy Month, or I think I butchered the title there, but go ahead.
It actually started, there's a day called National Horse Protection Day, which is March the 1st. And American Wild Horse Conservation really got behind that, kind of drummed up the public to support wild horses within the context of all horses on March the 1st. And then we had the idea, well, what if Colorado could actually really, really take this 30 stages further and actually create a Colorado Horse Protection Month? And we're absolutely delighted the governor kind of led that way with a proclamation on, I think it was February the 28th, to actually read the proclamation to assembled guests at the state capitol, signaling that it's Protection Month in Colorado. And within the, you know, when you have a proclamation, there's a suite of kind of whereas X, whereas Y. And the governor did a fabulous job of just recording the importance of wild horses to the culture and fabric of Colorado, whether that's the Blue Mustang as you come out of the airport, or the fact that the Broncos, I mean, I did the research, 1960 was the year that they were named after wild horses, effectively, because they were seen to embody the kind of passion and spirit that they wanted in the team. So wild horses are already part of Colorado. So all we're trying to do is bring that to the surface, give everybody a chance to really celebrate that for what it is.
And where can folks learn more about Wild Horse Awareness Month and how they can plug in to advocacy?
Yeah, I mean, the governor has been really proactive about sharing information about his proclamation and some of the news on his website. The First Gentleman, as we all know, is an absolute leading advocate for all animals in Colorado and wild horses as part of that. So he's also got loads of information. American Wild Horse Conservation website is a great resource if you want to learn more about wild horses generally. And then just on social media, I just love the way this is kind of bubbling up. This hasn't existed before. So it's not like we've got loads of history to go back on and say, look back at the resources from last year. This is a brand new concept. But I love the way that rescues, wild horse lovers, advocates are all kind of buying into this Protection Month and posting their own stories. So my real hope here is that this becomes something that other states will then emulate next year. So follow Colorado's leadership, and maybe we'll have state proclamations, and gosh, you could have 10 Western states all doing the same thing. That would be fabulous.
Absolutely. I hope to see other states catching on as well. And so final bit is, where do people find you on social media? And if they happen to be in the Denver area or visiting the Denver area, where can we find your work in person?
So I have taken the photo advocacy term really to heart. So that's now my website is www.photoadvocacy.org, no org, not com. So that's the place. That's my handle on social media. So Wilson Axby Photo Advocacy on Facebook, or Photo Advocacy Wilson Axby on Instagram. They have different rules about how you construct names. The Axby, by the way, is my wife's name. People get very confused. It's just Wilson plus Axby is my name and my wife's name, which is our children's name. It's as simple as that. And the gallery is in the heart of Denver's Art District. It's called Gallery 6 because we actually started on 6th Avenue in Cherry Creek, but we're now on 8th Avenue. But why change the name? So it's Gallery 6, 918 West 8th Avenue. And this is, there's 3 things going on this month. It's Denver Month of Photography for March. It's Colorectal Cancer Awareness Month, and it's Colorado Horse Protection Month. So all of those things are kind of coming to life in the gallery throughout March.
Wonderful. Yes, and we couldn't be more thankful for you and for Gallery 6. I've had my book released there. The Mountain Lion Foundation has had a talk there. Wolves, I love how you just want it to be a place for advocacy, and we couldn't be more thankful to have that space in the community and for your willingness to share it. So thank you again, Scott. We are so thankful to have you on today.
Thank you, Scott.
Thanks, Samantha.
This has been an episode of the Wildlife Wire with me, Mark Searles, and my co-host, Samantha Miller. Thank you for listening.